Hello everybody, it is me, Mr. Vince, and I hope you all have a great day today. And in this video, I'm actually going to show you guys every single OG texture that was added to Roblox Jailbreak. Basically, the textures that were added before Season 1 of beginnings. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the video. I won't be clarifying when the textures released, but I will go ahead and kind of show you guys each of the OG textures that I will show in this video, so that way you guys can see them and possibly get them in the future. Now, some of these textures are available in the garage, others are only available in trading. For this video, I'm actually going to use the Camaro because it's probably the best vehicle to show the textures on. And the Camaro is able to support pretty much every texture in the game except for the custom textures for some vehicles like the NASCAR Free and the Shogun and the NASCAR Holder. So I'm actually going to go ahead and pretty much go through all these OG textures, and like I said, some of them can be purchased in the garage and others can only be received from Jailbreak trading. So the first texture is the ball texture. The ball texture looks like this, and of course it is part of the garage. It is only 20,000 cash in the garage, and this is the texture that 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗵 used to use for his vehicles, and it's kind of like a pixel texture, but not necessarily. I mean, if you look very closely at the texture, it does kind of look like an actual pixel texture. It's a pretty neat looking texture, and it has the shades of black and white. So this is a pretty neat texture, and it's only 20,000 cash in the garage, like I said. The next texture is the camo texture. This texture is 50,000 in the garage, and it has its own gun skin variant, which is also called the camo texture. The camo texture is the first camo texture in Jailbreak, but we also got winter camo in Season 7 and desert camo as part of an update that we got earlier this year. The camo texture is a pretty neat looking texture, and for those wondering, most of these OG textures were created by Maplestick, so please keep that in mind. Alright, so now I'll go ahead and show you guys the candy cane texture. This texture is 40,000 in the garage, and this is what it looks like. Yeah, this is actually a pretty sick looking texture. It's just a red-white striped texture, and I like it. It looks pretty good, to be honest. The next texture is the cow texture. The cow texture is very cheap. It's only 4,000 in the garage, and it's what you expect. It basically depicts the cow's skin, so that's actually pretty neat. Yeah, this is the cow texture, and I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to be honest there. The next texture is the diamond texture. This texture is kind of glitched on the Camaro, but I'm not sure if that is intended. But I believe this texture might be fixed in the future. This texture is 40,000 in the garage, and I have to say it does look pretty neat. If I go ahead and use the interrogator with this texture, yeah, as you can see, it is kind of glitched and messed up. But that's probably just because the texture has been rendered a little bit differently on pretty much every vehicle that supports it. So hopefully this texture does get fixed up, but that is the diamond texture. The next texture is the donut texture. It is also 40,000 in the garage, and this is what it would look like on pretty much every vehicle except for one vehicle. That's right. The only vehicle with a unique donut texture is the Bugatti. The Bugatti is the only vehicle with a different donut texture, and this is what it looks like. Yeah. Now, by the time the donut texture was first released back in 2017, every vehicle at the time used this texture, but later on, this donut texture has been used instead. And I think the other one looks great, and I think it's going to remain the same on the Bugatti. So I don't think it's ever going to change, but there should be a separate donut texture for those who prefer this version of the donut texture. Still, I think this is a pretty neat looking texture, and I do find myself using it sometimes. Alright, the next texture is the Frit texture. This texture is 20,000 in the garage. And yeah, it's kind of like the black body color, but it has some polka dots on it. Yeah, they're pretty easy to see. And this is basically the texture that a lot of people used before the black body color actually became true black. And I have rarely seen people use this texture, but only certain people use this texture for a couple reasons. Of course, as you might have expected, this texture is kind of broken now because various vehicles have been retuned. So it does look a little bit messy, but most of these OG textures should be fixed up in the future. The next texture is the Frost texture, and this texture is 10,000 in the garage. It's basically a gradient texture. Yeah, there are a few gradient textures in Jailbreak, but this is one of them. As you can see, we got the colors of blue and white, as well as the shades of blue and white, as you can see. So we got a bright blue over here, and I think this is a nice texture for the winter season. The next texture is the Galaxy texture. It is 40,000 in the garage, and unfortunately, because of the retuning of various vehicles, this texture is kind of broken, but hopefully it does get fixed up. As you can see, this is the Galaxy texture as of right now. And yeah, sadly it is broken, so hopefully it does get fixed. The next texture is the Galaxy Wave, and it is only 20,000. And it works really well, especially on the Camaro. This texture still needs to be fixed though, but it definitely looks a lot better than the Galaxy texture, as far as I know. This is pretty much a synthwave themed texture, and I think it looks really nice. I like this texture. Chris and Mike used to use this texture, and I feel like this is a texture that deserves more praise. Alright, the next texture is the Ice texture. This texture is 20,000 in the garage, and it's kind of identical to the Diamond texture, except, yeah, you can see the cracks on the texture. And I feel like this is a pretty nice detailed texture. I mean, you can definitely see that we got some shades of both blue and white, and the details are really nice looking, to be honest. The next texture is currently discounted by the time this video gets released to YouTube, and that texture is the Lines texture. This texture is only 35,000 cash if the texture is not discounted. Currently it's cheaper, but that will change. So this is the Lines texture, and I think a couple people use it because of the lines that are part of the texture. I think this is neat, especially on vehicles like the Torpedo, because this texture works really well on vehicles that have a pretty linear and symmetrical body, such as the NASCARs and the Camaro. So this is a good texture overall. I like the black and the white on it too. But the next texture is the Paint texture. This one is 10,000 in the garage. And as you might have guessed it, there's a lot of paint on this texture. We got red, yellow, green, and blue on this texture. Yeah, it's pretty messy, but it's a good texture overall. The next texture is the Police texture. It is only 2,000 in the garage, so it's actually extremely cheap. And this is what it looks like. Yeah, it just turns your car into a police car, and I think that is actually pretty cool. But a lot of people don't use it because it's just way too basic, and there are way better textures out there. The next texture is the Racer texture. I really like this texture because of the design of the texture itself. And you can also see the stripes on the texture. So as you can see, we got the colors of red, gray, blue, and white. And I feel like this is a very good texture. It is only 10,000 in the garage, and is definitely worth getting for those who really want to make their car look even better. This texture fits really well for vehicles that have a linear and symmetrical body like the Torpedo, NASCARs, and Camaro, like I mentioned earlier in the video. The next texture is the rainbow texture. It is 4,000 cash in the garage, and it has all of the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. The next texture is the scorch texture. It is 40,000 in the garage, and it fits really well with the fall season. And it basically includes the shades of black, red, and possibly yellow. But yeah, you can definitely see that scorch is a very nice looking texture. It is kind of similar to the frost texture, but I feel like this is even better. The next texture is the swirl texture. It is 20,000 in the garage, and there are a lot of swirls on this texture. It's pretty good. It's colored pink, and I feel like there should be more swirl textures in Jailbreak. But please feel free to let me know what you guys think. The next texture is the two-sided texture. It is 20,000, and it's kind of similar to the police texture, except we only have one side being white and one side being black. So that's what the texture is about. The next texture is the volcano texture. This is kind of identical to the earthquake texture from Season 4 Epic Adventures, as you can see. But the volcano texture was added first, and the cracks are larger in size. This texture is 39,000 in the garage. So is it worth getting? I would say for the most part, yes. I think this is a very good looking texture. You can definitely see the cracks with the lava inside of the cracks. And I think this is a nice texture overall. The details are well done. The next texture is the wireframe texture, and it is 45,000 in the garage. This texture is supposed to just show a wireframed version of pretty much any vehicle you're using that supports this texture. But in reality, it's just a texture that kind of shows how wireframe mode works in applications like Roblox Studio and Blender. Yeah, it's pretty detailed, but it's simplistic too. The next texture is the zebra texture, and funnily enough, this is actually 40,000 compared to the cow texture, which is literally 10 times cheaper. So the zebra texture is 40,000, and for that you just get a striped texture. But I mean, the stripes definitely look a lot better on this texture. But here's a comparison between the cow texture and the zebra texture. So this is the cow texture, and you can see the black spots on the texture, and here is the zebra texture. Yeah, the black stripes are present instead of the black spots. So this texture is pretty good. I like it, but at the same time, there are still better textures out there. The next texture is the speed texture, and you can get this texture from tier 1 saves, as you can see. And yeah, you have to spend 5,000 to get a common save. Of course, I would rather just spend my money on the racer texture, because the racer texture definitely is a little bit better in my opinion. So I would rather just use the racer texture, but that's just me. I'll go ahead and open up the street save, and I just got myself 3,000 cash, so that's not bad. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the next texture. Sorry about that. The next texture is the vault texture, and you can actually get this texture. So if I go ahead and go over to the common save, the vault texture is part of the common save, and it is rarer than the speed texture, so you have to be lucky to get the vault texture. And it does work really well on vehicles that are linear shaped, like the torpedo and the Camaro, like I said. But this texture, for the most part, does not look too well on vehicles that are way too crazy, like the 𝗏𝗫𝗍 and the arachnid. But the next texture we have is the taxi texture. This texture is obtainable in saves as well. So the save that you can get the taxi texture from is from street saves, and they're common, so getting the taxi texture may be a piece of cake. The next texture that we have in the list is Classic Variant 2. Classic Variant 2 is the only classic variant that is still obtainable today, and it is currently, by the time I'm making this video, 4,000 cash. Yeah, that's pretty cheap for a texture. Am I right? Yeah, this is the only classic variant that is obtainable, like I said. as both Classic Variant 1 and Classic Variant 3 are no longer obtainable as of today. And if you want to get them, you just have to trade for them. So this is Classic Variant 1. This texture just includes one stripe that goes through the entire body of a vehicle. And it kind of reminds me of the older vehicle models from 2017. And at the time, almost every vehicle included this stripe. But of course, the colors were different, as the stripe was black. But I think that was pretty cool. And then we have Classic Variant 3. And basically, it just includes 3 stripes. One big stripe in the middle and 2 stripes that are outside of the stripe and are thinner. So this is the texture, and like I said, it did retire, so you can no longer get this texture. Classic Variant 1, I believe, was 4,000, and Classic Variant 3, I believe, was 10,000. You used to be able to get them in saves too, but because of various updates, including the Saber Variant update, these textures are no longer obtainable officially. The next texture is the Peach texture. It is another gradient texture, and it basically includes orange and yellow. So this is a pretty decent texture. You used to be able to get this texture in saves as well, but it could also be obtained by buying the starter pack game pass, which was 399 Robux. However, because of the nukes update in 2020, and eventually the texture retired. The next texture is the Ladybug texture, and I think this is a pretty underrated texture. Not a lot of people know about this texture, but even then, this is still a pretty decent texture, and it was supposed to be for those who like ladybugs. So this texture was only obtainable from purchasing saves at the time, and it was classified as rare. So getting this texture was a pain, and that also went for the Peach texture, as it was also considered rare. But now I'll go ahead and talk about some other textures. The next texture is the Pixel texture. And I think this is a really good looking pixel texture. This was the first actual pixel texture in the game. It was only obtainable for those who played Jailbreak Beta before August 2017. And as of today, you can now trade for it. But if you are not a beta texture like me, as you can see, there are no particles coming out of the pixel texture. Now, the reason why the developers did this is because for those who actually played Jailbreak Beta, should be able to be recognized as an actual beta tester, and they definitely deserved the pixel particle effects. So if you're not a beta texture, then it's just a stationary pixel texture and nothing happens. It's just an ordinary texture. And it includes the colors of red, pink, and blue, as you can see. The next texture is the checker texture. This is currently the most valuable texture in Jailbreak trading, and this is what it looks like. It is kind of similar to the taxi texture, except it's completely checkered, as you can see. Yeah, it looks like one of those cafeteria floors. Anyway, if you wanted to get the checker texture, you had to buy access to the game Demo Vehicle Demo 1, but it is no longer available as of 2019, I believe, because developers decided to private the game. But if you did manage to get the texture beforehand, then you would keep it in Jailbreak, unless you trade it away. The checker texture, like I said, is the most valuable texture in the game, mainly because of the number of people who do not have the texture. A large majority of people in Jailbreak today do not have the checker texture. The next texture is the field texture. This texture was obtainable from the museum update until the July 2020 update. You could only buy this in the garage, and it was only 20,000. Thanks to the 2022 Fall Updates Miscellaneous update that improved and revamped hyperchromes. These textures do work on various vehicles like the Camaro, as you can see. But this is the field texture, and I think this is an extremely underrated texture. It looks amazing. I mean, we got the green. You can finally touch some actual grass on the texture, which is pretty funny. But it's supposed to look like a football field, so I think this is actually pretty cool. The next texture is the armor texture. If you wanted to get this texture, you had to redeem the code �WeWillTakeOver during the Alien Puzzle event back in early 2019. The developers, I believe, added it in for fun, so there you go. If you redeemed the code before it expired, you would get this texture. It does look kind of similar to the Black Ice texture, except it's definitely more OG and was the last texture, I believe, to be created by Maple Stick, but it could be wrong. The next texture is the money texture. Yes, I said texture many times, but I'll also try to say skin. So this is the money skin. It was introduced in OG Season 2. It was the only OG Season 2 skin that retired in the July 2020 update, and I am not entirely sure why. The money texture was only available for 5,000 cash, and you actually had to reach level 10 on the criminals team to get this skin. It does look pretty good, and if you're a big fan of money and or you like Mr. Krabs, this texture is just for you. The next skin is the bacon skin. This is supposed to be based off of 𝗦𝘂𝗺𝗆𝗆𝗆, a very iconic jailbreak YouTuber, but it was also introduced in OG Season 2. If you wanted to get the skin, you had to reach level 20 on the criminals team and just buy it for 5,000 cash. The next texture is the hot dog texture, and again it was introduced in OG Season 2, and you had to reach level 30 on the criminals team, and you needed 5,000 cash to buy this texture too. The next one is the tiger skin, and it was based off of 𝗏𝗏𝗏. It was introduced in, you guessed it, OG Season 2, and once again you needed 5,000 cash, but you had to reach level 40 on the criminals team to buy the skin. And we got 𝗏𝗏𝗆𝗆𝗆. 𝗏𝗏𝗆𝗆𝗆 again was added in OG Season 2, and you had to reach level 50 on the criminals team, and you also had to buy it for 5,000 cash. Now I'll go ahead and talk about the cop related textures that were part of OG Season 2. So this one is the wavy texture. You had to reach level 10 on the cops team, and you had to purchase it for 5,000 cash. All these OG Season 2 textures cost 5,000 cash and were 5,000 cash until the release of Season 5 Let the Memes Begin, which patched the ability to buy these textures in the garage. So if you were level 10 before Season 5 Let the Memes Begin released, you were able to buy both the wavy and the money textures. The next one is the napkinate texture, aka the glowing yellow skin. This was introduced in the same season, as I mentioned many times, but you have to reach level 20 on the cops team to get the texture, as long as you buy it for 5,000 cash. The next one is the earth texture. I think this is a really good looking texture. Some people really like this texture for a fact. Geography. Yeah, if it's your favorite, then this texture is just for you. You have to reach level 30 on the police team in OG Season 2 to get the texture, as long as you have like 5,000 cash. Yeah, I've mentioned it too many times. I'm sorry. The next one is the lightning texture. This is an amazing looking skin, and you had to reach level 40 on the cops team in OG Season 2 to get the texture. And lastly, the blue pixel texture. Yep, this is legit the last OG texture that we got for this video, and you had to reach level 50 on the police team in OG Season 2 and buy it for 5,000 cash to get the texture. And yes, there are some other textures out there too, but most of those textures have been removed, including Purple Indy, Ogre, and Shark Skin. So I will not be including those because they're no longer in the game, unfortunately, but they may return in the future. But yeah, those are all of the OG textures that we have in Jailbreak before the season system has been revamped in December 2020, which also introduced Season 1 Beginnings, as well as the fire and snowstorm textures. Please feel free to let me know which is your favorite texture part of OG Jailbreak. But anyway, that is all I got for this video. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. My name is Mr. Vince, and I'll see you guys next time.